Delighted to be here and speaking after Stephen. I just absolutely love his passion for the social enterprise. He was an individual who passed hockey AstroTurf and has turned that experience into an absolutely wonderful social enterprise that is not for profit, is entirely volunteer based, and is doing a tremendous amount of good for the men who participate weekly in this game. I suppose just to say, I agree with Stephen. 349 games, over 6,000, nearly 7,000 game experiences. It really ought to be evidence enough to back something like this. When guys consistently show up week in and week out, there's a resounding message that we should all hear. I commend Stephen. I'm delighted he picked up the phone to me and allowed me to be part of this partnership as the research arm, and I really do commend his approach that the decisions to be taken by the social enterprise are to be evidence-based. So I'm going to talk you through the evidence-based arm of this, and that is the partnership with the social enterprise. And I suppose the very first question we'd have had when we were having that initial conversation, and Stephen really had this vision to scale up the enterprise, is should we scale it? Is it feasible? So what I'm going to show you here now is the theoretical framework underpinning the research process that we're engaged in. So this figure was developed by public health specialists in the University of Sydney, and you can apply it to absolutely any public health problem. If you want to develop a trajectory to identifying a solution and implementing it at a national level to address that problem. So I suppose the second green box here, the solution generation, came to us in the form of Stephen's social enterprise, that is Football Co-operative, and our job then was to test that particular innovation, which is the next green box over. And this is the project that we have created around the stepwise approach. The first study, which is the social return on investment evaluation that we've done, is what I'm predominantly going to present here today. But there's also two other studies ongoing. We have a study based on implementation science that's looking at the barriers and facilitators to what's making this work. We're also understanding a little bit more about what's happening on the pitches and the level of activity guys are doing. And I'm going to say a little bit towards the end about the fourth study that's going to look at that replication that Stephen spoke about in his presentation. So kicking off with that first study, here's Steve Daly, who's the PhD student on this, and it was asking that question, is it feasible to scale this up? And we adopted, the daisies. Here we go. This is a social return on investment model. So I'm not going to get too technical here. It's a very, very specific methodology that has 7 steps, from developing who the stakeholders are all the way through to calculating the SROI. And the arrows around these 7 steps are the principles that we really have to adhere to when moving through these steps. So for example, it's really important we involve stakeholders at all stages. We understand what changes. We don't overclaim. We have to be really cautious in our evaluations. We have to be transparent throughout and verify our results and keep involving the stakeholders in that process. So this was the methodology we adopted, and we implemented it over this time frame. It took us 18 months to 2 years to move through that first step all the way through the 7th step. So you can see we started in around March 21, where we started to develop the logic map and identify who are the stakeholders who might involve in this study. In April 21, we started consulting with the stakeholders, and I'll say a little bit more about that. And we didn't really come to the figure until October 23, when we worked through the 7 steps. But I just want to highlight that big piece in between from May 21 to May 2022, where we did a 12-month continued repeated assessment of the primary stakeholders, which were the participants in this study. So we kept going back to the men to measure changes over time. So step 1, who were the stakeholders? So obviously the participants who go out and play football every week were the largest benefactors of this initiative. And the stakeholder, remember, is anybody who either has a positive or a negative impact from the activity that is there. So there was 123 guys registered to play at the Malahide site. We only included the Malahide site in the study. They were looking for a recreational activity in the evenings and to connect with people in their area, and they really enjoyed football as a competitive workout. We also included their significant others. We knew that the vast majority of these were married or living with people, so their female partners, as they were also included in this study, 123 of those. Stephen talked us through the volunteer framework that he has at sites, and at the Malahide site there were 6 volunteer coordinators who were stakeholders, not just as players themselves, but stakeholders in the form of what were they getting out of being volunteers delivering a sport for good initiative that is Football Co-operative. And we also had the community partners. Remember, this was a hockey pitch that was being rented, and members of the hockey club were given access to Football Co-operative for use of the pitch. So these were the 4 stakeholder groups that we then had to take through from steps 2 through to 7. I'm not going to take every stakeholder group through all those stages and put you all to sleep, but I will take the participant group through those stages. Okay? So what we had to do for each stakeholder group was develop what's called a theory of change, because we needed to know what were the outcomes that each stakeholder group was experiencing, because as researchers then we had to measure those outcomes. Can I just say I love this methodology. Usually as researchers we go in, after reading some literature and saying, well, this is what we're going to measure from you. This flips everything on its head. Stakeholders have to continually tell us what to do. So the stakeholders had to define their own outcomes, which we would then measure. So the methodology, first of all, we had to consult with them to draft theories of change. So you can see here we went out and we conducted interviews with 14 participants. We then had to draft a theory of change, go back and do focus groups and make sure they signed off on what we came up with before we could collect any data. And here is a theory of change for the participant group. So you can see it's a very visual way of telling their story quite succinctly. So we learned a bit about who the men were, what it was about the environment that they played in that they enjoyed, and the impact that it was having on them. So if you look at that impact middle section there, you can see that they were getting personal benefits. It was a form of escapism for some of these guys. It was something they looked forward to each week. They got a better life balance, and it was good for their self-esteem. Others were talking about positive modifications in their diet and exercise and increased motivation as a result, and they were getting more active generally. And they also spoke about the social interaction in terms of the friendships, networking, and even how lovely it was to be in a community and bump into somebody in your local shop and actually know who they were and have that connection. But they also told us about adverse impacts. Some of them were getting injured, sometimes they weren't sleeping right after they were coming home late having played football. Not every impact gets translated into an outcome. It has to be material. That's one of the SROI principles. So at the end of this process, we had 4 clear outcomes to measure from this stakeholder group. Improved mental health and well-being, improved physical activity, improved social health, but also increased injuries. We then learned throughout the process later on that we also had to look at any disimprovements in any of these, just to be absolutely and utterly transparent. So these were the outcomes that we were to measure for this particular group. So, and as I said, we went through this process with each stakeholder group, so you can see here that the volunteers coordinators were also telling us that they had improved self-esteem and self-worth because they were providing this Sport for Good initiative. They'd increased social connection. They themselves had reduced stress. The significant others spoke of improved family and partner dynamic and relationships. They also spoke about an improved family physical health because their partner was, and improved health, well-being and happiness. We have the most fantastic quotes from some of these significant others who said, please do not stop this. These men do everything in the house, kids are in bed, and she's the house to herself, and one woman told us that it's her bath night with the candles. Do not stop Football Co-operative, I need this. And the community partners, you know, this local hockey club had a really reliable tenant. They have an income stream that they wouldn't have had. This pitch was closed, lights were off. And also, the community partners themselves were also benefiting in that they knew that they were doing something extra good for their clubs. So there's an awful lot of happening that we had to measure. So, one other piece with respect to the methodology is you've got to question, does everyone benefit the same? You can't assign the same value to everybody if they don't necessarily get the benefit, and what is making the difference? So education levels, income levels didn't impact the benefit that the guys were experiencing. However, their participation level did, which would make a lot of sense. If you're playing more frequently, you're going to get more benefit. So we had to look at this. So the first table is how we segregated the group according to their participation level. So did they play weekly, did they play fortnightly, or did they play less than fortnightly? So that's our high, medium and low categories. We went, and we didn't contrive a study here, we went out into the real world and tested the guys on the pitch as they were coming to play. So as you would have it, some guys started day one and played for the full 12 months. Some guys started after 3 months, some guys started after 6 months, some guys stopped after 6 months. So we had to look at their completion level as well. So we had to take our high, medium and low and look across completion levels. Okay, so we had to segregate our group, only our participant stakeholder group in this way, so that when we were assigning value, we weren't going to be over-claiming for any particular group. Okay? So, I think I missed a slide, but I'm okay. We'll keep going. So we measured the outcomes. So we measured physical health using metrics such as waist circumference, weight, aerobic fitness. We measured social and mental well-being using validated scales. And again, at baseline 3, 6 and 12 months, we repeated these measures with our stakeholders, our participant stakeholders, and at 12 months we would have put a questionnaire in front of all other stakeholders. Did you experience these outcomes? So we had objective and we had subjective measures. We were looking for particular thresholds to define a meaningful change. So a change and an outcome was if a man experienced a 3 centimetre change in his waist circumference, 5% change in his weight, or a 10% change in his aerobic fitness. And if he had any one of those, plus the subjective, yes, I did achieve a physical health benefit, then we said that was a change. Okay? And then what we did at the 12-month mark was we asked every single stakeholder, what is the value that you place on the outcome that you achieved? What would you pay? If you lost it, what would you pay to have it back? Okay, and we put a scale in front of them from 0 to 10,000 euros. So what I'm going to show you now is kind of a busy slide, but it's a breakdown of the 3 positive benefits for the participant group. So the physical, mental and social outcomes across all our different groups of participants. Okay? So bear with me on this one, right? So if you see here, we have the physical health benefit, we have the percentage of people who achieve the thresholds, and we have it for our high, full, so these guys have participated every week across the full 12 months. These were every fortnight across the full 12 months, less than a fortnight across the full 12 months. And what you'll see, the value they placed on it, 5,500 euros is what these guys who participated most placed on the physical health benefit that they got from playing. As you can see, you play less, there's less value. Okay? So for each outcome, we quantified the total value. So it's just under, it's 224,000 euros is the value that this group of men placed on the physical health benefit they got. And you can see the same for mental health and social health. And we did this for every single outcome for every single participant. Okay? However, we have to not overclaim in this process. We have to discount these values. Did them playing football display something else that would have given them this benefit? Is there another thing they could have done that would have given them an equal benefit? Can they attribute all the benefit to playing, or did they take up the gym at the same time? And what will happen if the activity stops? Is all the benefit lost? So there's 4 particular discounting measures that we had to review against each of these outcomes before we could finalise the value for each outcome. Now we had interviewed these guys. They must really, really fantastic interviews where they told us things like, I just love playing the game. Not to get too arty-farty, but it's kind of a form of expression almost, It's something which is accepted within the male sphere. Other guys talked of, this is the last place guys can really express their masculinity in a safe way that they're not going to be judged. And they were really clearly telling us, I'm no good at gents. You know, Stephen calls, I love that expression, chasing the footpath. They don't want to do this. They want the competition of playing football. So we were conservative in our discounting, but it's also really evident these guys want to play football. You can't just put something else in front of them and think it's going to be a replacement for this. And they attributed the majority of the value to playing football, not to something else they were doing in their lives. So after we had calculated the value for each single outcome, we then had to look at the input costs. Okay? So as Stephen said, participants did play a game fee to come out and play. And modest, it's a €5 a game, it's a play as you go. As somebody who, tries to do Pilates every once in a while at 22 quid a pop, this is really good value. So the participants had an input cost. So too did the volunteer coordinators who were buying the bibs and paying the insurance and things. I'm going to highlight 2 bits here, and I'll be honest, I'm a wee bit aggrieved, but I stick by the rules. You have to, in the methodology, put in labour costs. You just have to, okay? However, there were no costs associated. This is an entirely volunteer-led initiative. It has not cost the state a penny for these men to come out and make this happen. It's self-funding. However, and I will say, it is good to have the costs so that we can do our scenario analysis for scale. Okay, so the costs are in there. So it cost about €21,500 for the benefit that you're going to see. So this is the da-da moment where we take all of the outcomes and their costs, which comes to €381,366,000. We divide it by the input costs, and here is our 1760, which is the social value returned for each euro invested in this initiative. So to answer the question, this is feasible to scale. It's a wee bit of a no-brainer. But we don't just know this, and I do want to pause, I put Stephen there purposefully to say that, he could have just walked past the hockey pitch. He could have just set up a match for him and his mates and thought no further. But he has gone a hell of a lot further. For the 600 guys who are registered, who are playing weekly and getting this benefit, for the state who hasn't forked out a penny, and he has a really clear, strong vision to make this available in a very cost-effective way for so many more men in the country, which I just think is wonderful. But we do know more than just this. We know that it is having a significant health impact. We know that the guys across the 12 months achieved a significant improvement in aerobic fitness, and that 82 of them achieved the 10% threshold at 12 months. We also know that as a group, and remember the participation levels varied considerably, but as a group they lost 2.5 centimetres in their waist circumference, and at 12 months, the guys who showed up and were still playing, 49% of them achieved the 3 centimetre waist reduction threshold. Now this is really significant. We know that each of these metrics equates to about a 6% reduction in cardiovascular risk. And despite the fact that they were young guys, sub 40, 83% of them attended with 3 or more cardiovascular risk factors. Okay, so they really, are a niche group to get. We had 74% of them overweight or obese. Okay, weight shifts are less, and actually weight is now becoming a much less relevant metric for health than waist circumference for men. And aerobic fitness is actually, I think, the greatest prognostic indicator of all-cause mortality. So we do want guys getting fitter and reducing their waist circumference for health. As somebody said earlier, Roger said earlier, guys tend to overestimate their health. We have 90% of these guys, so despite the fact that they have 3 or more cardiovascular risk factors, 90% of them told us that their health was good to excellent. Okay, so that's normal. I've seen that over the last 20 years in men's health. Unfortunately, in some of these validated scales we use, their baseline metrics are really high, so it's hard to measure change. However, we did see a reduction in loneliness and an improvement in sleep quality at 6 months. And the guys are telling us that they're modifying their behaviours. So 74% are more active, 43% are eating better. And we hear this a bit, it's the competitive bit that guys often have. They want to improve their performance on their pitch, so they might do a bit more activity off the pitch and eat better. And some have also talked about reducing their alcohol consumption. So just looking at 3 of our key metrics in terms of risk factor reduction, we have waist circumference, BMI and aerobic fitness. And what you want to see here are the red bars reducing and the green bars increasing. So for example, the very, very high risk waist circumference measures reduced from just about 28% to about 12% between baseline and 12 months. And you can see the green bar moved up. So more men moved into the healthy zone with respect to their waist circumference. Not as big changes with weight, as I said, but if you come over and look then at the far end of the slide, you'll see that from baseline to 12 months, there's quite a shift in the red bar from those men who are in the high risk due to their aerobic capacity. And this is not surprising. I'm going to share some of Sarah's preliminary work here. This is the kind of distance these guys are covering on the pitch. So we have 94 guys who put on GPS vests across 214 game instances, and they are doing an average of almost 7k when they are running. And if you think that's the average, there's the guts of 50% of them doing more than that. And they're not just out there doing the jog like I might be doing if I was running around the pitch. If you look at the far side of those green bars I've got there, 50% of these guys are spending their time in zones 3 and 4 of their heart rate, which is 81% or higher of their heart rate max. So they're actually out there expending an awful lot of energy and engaging what we would call vigorous physical activity for the hour that they're playing. And just a couple of preliminary findings from the second study is we again are speaking with a variety of stakeholders to try and understand what are the facilitators and barriers to participation, what are in the solid boxes are the facilitators. So, the cost matters. It makes it really affordable for these guys to come and, they don't have to commit to 10 weeks and pay their 50 quid. They can literally pay $5 as they go. It's safe. These guys talked about not wanting to get injured. They have, work and family commitments. So it can't be this aggressive place where they could potentially get injured. It's really, really efficiently organised. As a researcher trying to collect data before they ran onto the pitch, I can vouch for that, as can Steve and Tom, because they're running past you and they were playing within minutes of getting out of their car. It's really well organised. And the games are really accessible, and there's quite a diversity. And I mean that sincerely. For anyone who's ever thinking about out and playing a game of football, there's quite a diversity in ability, and through Steve's algorithm or whatever he's doing, he is placing guys appropriately, and games are competitive. And look, it's not perfect. There are tweaks, and hence the need for this study in terms of areas of improvement. There are interpersonal conflicts. They're rare, but they can happen, as Stephen said. To try and be more inclusive of guys that might experience cultural or language barriers, that's something to be looked at. For some guys, the late evenings are inconvenient, and there can be transportation issues at those times as well. So there's plenty to be looked at, but as I said, these are preliminary findings, and we hope to support Stephen in the expansion by feeding into the implementation strategy through this study in particular. Overall, however, and I think this quote really sums it up, guys are reporting that it's a safe space to enjoy football without too much pressure. It says an awful lot for what's been achieved on the ground. So next steps, just to remind you that this is the journey that we're on from a research perspective. We are looking to the future of Study 4 as the games expand, and the expansion is proposed to look something like this at the moment. So here we are in 24, there's 2 sites that are being delivered independently by the cooperative, and in 2025 looking to increase it to 12 sites, so kind of start slowly, and I think members of Sport Ireland and the FAI are here. We'll be partnering the cooperative in making these happen. Looking to go to 30 sites in year 2, 50 to 60 sites in year 3. In addition to the partnerships requirements at sites are a floodlit AstroTurf venue that is open up till 10 o'clock at night, so if you know of any, let Stephen know. And the other key piece that the cooperative are trying to incorporate as they go forward is to ensure that 30 to 40% of the areas that they go to are in areas with a high deprivation index. And finally, I just want to say an absolutely massive thank you. These guys at the bottom, the participants in the study, were incredibly patient with us, and as we harassed them to get data over the year, and are continuing to do so in the other studies. And I also wanted to say an absolutely massive thanks to the research team and to the students who are here, and particularly to Tom for this particular report, and to Steve Daly, who's the PhD student. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to be part of this.